Picture this. You're at what's supposed to be a joyful baby shower, watching your sister-in-law tear apart every gift you've carefully chosen, making snide comments about your husband's military career, and basically treating you like you don't belong in your own family. Then, in one moment, everything changes when your husband stands up, locks eyes with someone across the room, and delivers the most spine-tingling military salute you've ever witnessed. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with delicate pink roses around the border. "Join us in celebrating baby girl Martinez," it read in an elegant script. My sister-in-law Carmen had always been one for theatrics, but this baby shower invitation looked like it cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. I stared at the invitation while my husband Jake finished his morning push-ups in our cramped base housing living room. We'd been married for 3 years, but Carmen had never quite warmed up to me. Maybe it was because I wasn't from their tight-knit Los Angeles neighborhood. Or maybe it was because Jake chose the military over the family construction business. Either way, family gatherings always felt like walking through a minefield. "You sure you want to go to this thing?" Jake asked, toweling off sweat from his workout. His dark hair was getting a little long by Army standards, but he was between deployments and enjoying the slight relaxation of grooming standards. "It's your sister's first baby," I replied, though my stomach was already churning at the thought. "Besides, your mom would never forgive us if we skipped it." Jake's mother, Rosa Martinez, had been planning the shower for months. She'd called me twice a week with updates about the decorations, the menu, the guest list that seemed to grow longer each time we spoke. What started as an intimate gathering of 15 women had ballooned into a 40-person extravaganza at the community center in Westwood. The day of the shower arrived with typical Southern California sunshine. I'd spent hours the night before wrapping gifts. A beautiful handmade quilt I'd found at a local craft fair, a set of organic cotton onesies, and a wooden toy chest that Jake had insisted on buying despite our tight budget. We weren't exactly rolling in money on a staff sergeant's salary, but family was family. Jake wore his dress blues at my request. He looked sharp, and I knew it would make his mother proud. Carmen's husband Diego would probably be there in his expensive suit, showing off his success in real estate, but Jake carried himself with a quiet dignity that money couldn't buy. The community center was transformed into a pink and gold wonderland. Balloons arched over every doorway, and tables groaned under the weight of elaborate floral centerpieces. Carmen sat in what could only be described as a throne, a white wicker chair decorated with tulle and ribbons, positioned at the center of the room where she could survey her kingdom. She looked radiant, I had to admit. Pregnancy agreed with her, and she wore a flowing maxi dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her dark hair was professionally styled, and her makeup was flawless. She was holding court with a group of women I didn't recognize, their laughter ringing out across the room. "Mia!" Rosa Martinez swept me into a warm hug that smelled like vanilla and coffee. "You look beautiful, mija." And Jake, so handsome in his uniform. Jake hugged his mother, lifting her slightly off the ground. "Hi, Mom. The place looks incredible." "Your sister had very specific ideas," Rosa said with a knowing smile. Come, let me introduce you to everyone." The next hour was a blur of names and faces. Carmen's college friends, her yoga instructor, women from her book club, neighbors I'd never met despite 3 years of family gatherings. Each introduction felt like a small test I was failing. They asked about my work at the base clinic, my hobbies, where I was from originally. Polite questions that somehow felt like interrogations. Jake stayed close, his hand on the small of my back, offering quiet support. But I could see him scanning the room with the alertness that never quite left military personnel, even at family parties. Old habits from deployments where awareness meant survival. When it came time for gifts, Carmen positioned herself back in her decorated chair, while the rest of us formed a semicircle around her. Her friend Sophia acted as secretary, carefully writing down each gift and its giver for thank you notes later. The first gifts were impressive. A top-of-the-line stroller system, a designer diaper bag, a baby monitor with more features than most smartphones. Carmen's responses were perfectly appropriate, but I caught the subtle evaluations. The slight pause before, "Oh, how lovely," when a gift didn't meet her standards. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she opened something from Target instead of a boutique. Then came our turn. Carmen unwrapped the quilt first, holding it up to examine the intricate stitching. "This is handmade," she said, as if the word itself was slightly distasteful. "How rustic." Quote. A few women murmured appreciatively about the craftsmanship, but Carmen had already moved on to the onesies. She held up one of the organic cotton pieces, checking the tag. "Oh, these are nice. Very practical." The word practical sounded like a consolation prize. The wooden toy chest was last. Carmen ran her fingers over the smooth finish, and for a moment, I thought she might actually like it. Then she noticed the small imperfection near one corner, a tiny knot in the wood that the craftsman had left natural. "Well," she said with a laugh that didn't sound amused, "I suppose military families have to be budget conscious. It's not everyone who can afford the finer things." The room went quiet. I felt heat creeping up my neck, that familiar flush of embarrassment and anger mixed together. Jake's hand found mine, squeezing gently, but I could feel the tension in his grip. "Carmen," Rosa started, but Carmen wasn't finished. "I mean, it's just so different, isn't it? Jake could have stayed in LA, worked with Diego and Daddy, maybe even expanded the business. Instead, he chose to play soldier." She said it with the same tone she might use to describe a child's game of dress-up. "Now that's enough," Rosa said firmly, but Carmen was on a roll now, basking in the attention of her audience. "Don't get me wrong, I support the troops and all that," Carmen continued, one hand resting on her belly. "It's just that some choices limit your options, you know? I mean, look at this place." She gestured around the community center. "When my friends have their showers, we rent private rooms at the Beverly Hills Hotel. But this is what we can manage when we're financially constrained." I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab Jake's hand and walk out of that over-decorated room and never look back. But Jake sat perfectly still beside me, his face a mask of calm that I recognized from his military training. He was containing something, holding it back with the discipline that had been drilled into him through years of service. Carmen opened a few more gifts. A cashmere baby blanket that she cooed over, a silver rattle that she immediately declared precious, a hand-carved wooden mobile that drew genuine enthusiasm. The contrast with her reaction to our gifts couldn't have been more obvious. "You know," Carmen said as she unwrapped a designer baby carrier, "I was telling Diego just last week how proud I am that our daughter will grow up with stability. A father who comes home every night, who doesn't disappear for months at a time to who knows where." Her eyes flicked toward Jake. "Children need consistency, don't you think?" The room had gone from uncomfortable to painfully tense. Several women were studying their hands or checking their phones. Rosa looked mortified, her face flushed with embarrassment for her daughter's behavior. But Jake still didn't react. He sat there in his dress blues, back straight, hands folded in his lap, looking like he was enduring a particularly boring briefing rather than a personal attack on his character and choices. Carmen seemed disappointed by his lack of response. She'd been poking and prodding, looking for a reaction, and his calm was clearly frustrating her. So she decided to escalate. "I just think it's sad, really," she said, her voice taking on a fake sympathetic tone. "All that potential, wasted on taking orders from people who probably never even went to college. I mean, what kind of future is that? What kind of legacy?" That's when I noticed something change in the room, not in Jake. He remained perfectly still, but in the atmosphere itself. There was a shift, a subtle tension that I couldn't quite identify. An older woman sitting near the back of the room had gone very still. She'd been quiet throughout the gift opening, politely applauding each present, but now she was watching Carmen with an expression I couldn't read. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'd been introduced to her earlier as Mrs. Thompson, a neighbor of Rosa's, but I hadn't paid much attention beyond the polite pleasantries. Carmen was still talking, Something about the importance of choosing careers that offered real advancement opportunities when Mrs. Thompson stood up. She moved with surprising grace for her age, walking slowly toward the gift table where Carmen held court. The room gradually quieted as people noticed her movement, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Jake noticed too. For the first time since Carmen had started her verbal assault, he turned his head to track Mrs. Thompson's progress across the room. And that's when I saw his expression change completely. Jake's face had gone from controlled neutrality to something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not frustration. Recognition. His eyes tracked Mrs. Thompson's movement with laser focus, and I watched as his entire posture shifted. His shoulders squared in a way that had nothing to do with basic military bearing and everything to do with genuine respect. Mrs. Thompson reached the front of the room where Carmen sat surrounded by her mountain of gifts. The older woman moved with quiet authority, her simple navy dress and pearl necklace understated compared to the elaborate decorations around her. "Carmen, dear," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. "What a lovely shower. You've been very fortunate with such generous gifts. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." Carmen beamed, clearly pleased with what she interpreted as praise. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Everyone has been so thoughtful." Indeed, they have. Mrs. Thompson's gaze swept over the opened presents before settling on our contributions. She picked up the wooden toy chest, running her fingers along the smooth edges with obvious appreciation. "This piece is particularly beautiful. The craftsmanship is exquisite." Carmen's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, well, yes, it's very functional." "Functional," Mrs. Thompson repeated thoughtfully. "You know, Carmen, I've learned over the years that the most meaningful gifts are often the most functional ones. They're the ones that endure, that serve a purpose long after the novelty of prettier things has worn off." She set the toy chest down carefully and picked up the handmade quilt, examining the intricate stitching with the eye of someone who understood quality workmanship. "This reminds me of quilts my grandmother made during the Great Depression," Mrs. Thompson continued. "Every stitch was a prayer. Every pattern told a story. They weren't just blankets. They were heirlooms, made to last generations." Carmen shifted uncomfortably in her decorated chair. The women around her had gone quiet, sensing the subtle shift in dynamics. "Of course, I appreciate handmade things," Carmen said carefully. "I just think for a baby you want everything to be perfect, you know? The best quality, the finest materials." Mrs. Thompson nodded slowly. "Oh, I absolutely agree. The best quality is essential." She folded the quilt with reverent care. "Though I've found that true quality isn't always measured by price tags. Sometimes it's measured by the sacrifice behind the gift." I saw Jake's hands clench slightly in his lap. He was still watching Mrs. Thompson with that intense focus, as if she were delivering a briefing that could determine the outcome of an operation. "Speaking of sacrifice," Mrs. Thompson said, turning to face Jake directly, "I don't believe we've been properly introduced, young man. Though I suspect I know more about you than you might realize." Jake started to rise, but Mrs. Thompson held up a gentle hand. "Please, don't get up on my account. I know you military folks are all about proper protocol, but this is a family gathering." Her smile was warm but held something deeper, something that made several people in the room straighten unconsciously. Carmen looked confused by the attention shifting away from her. "Mrs. Thompson lives in the neighborhood," she explained to Jake. "She's been so helpful with party planning advice." "Has she now?" Jake's voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the slight tension in his tone. Mrs. Thompson chuckled. "Oh, I've thrown my share of parties over the years. Dinner parties, charity galas, state functions. You learn a thing or two about hospitality when you've had to entertain foreign dignitaries and military commanders." The room went very still. Carmen blinked, clearly trying to process what Mrs. Thompson had just said. "Military commanders?" Rosa asked, her voice curious. "Oh yes," Mrs. Thompson said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Occupational hazard of my former life." You meet all sorts of interesting people when you work in defense circles. Generals, admirals, some of the finest men and women this country has ever produced. Jake had gone completely rigid. I watched the color drain from his face as pieces of some puzzle I couldn't see began falling into place. Carmen, oblivious to the undercurrents, seized on what she thought was a connection. Oh, how interesting. So you understand military culture. Then you probably agree that it can be quite limiting for families. All that moving around, the uncertainty, the danger. Mrs. Thompson's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her blue eyes. Limiting? I'm not sure I will follow. Well, Carmen gestured vaguely, the lifestyle, never knowing where you'll be stationed next, having to live on base, the modest income. It's just so restrictive compared to civilian careers. Modest income, Mrs. Thompson repeated slowly, restrictive lifestyle. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room unconsciously lean forward. Carmen, dear, let me tell you about the restriction. Restriction is being separated from your family for 15 months while you serve in a combat zone. Restriction is making life or death decisions that affect thousands of people while you're running on 3 hours of sleep and cold MREs. Restriction is carrying the weight of knowing that your choices might bring soldiers home to their families, or might not. The room was dead silent now. Carmen's face had gone pale. As for modest income, Mrs. Thompson continued, I've found that wealth isn't always measured in dollars. Some of the richest people I've known were those who chose service over self-interest, duty over comfort, sacrifice over security. Jake was staring at Mrs. Thompson with an expression of dawning realization and something that looked like awe. His military training was warring with some recognition that was making his hands tremble slightly. You speak as if you have personal experience, Rosa said quietly. Mrs. Thompson smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. Oh, I do. 35 years of it, actually. I started as a Navy ensign straight out of the Naval Academy, class of 1965. One of only 12 women in my graduating class. I retired as a Rear Admiral after commanding naval operations in 3 different theaters. The silence that followed was absolute. Carmen looked like she'd been slapped. Admiral Thompson, Jake said quietly, and for the first time all day, his voice cracked slightly. Admiral Thompson? Carmen's voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Thompson turned to face Jake fully, and I saw something pass between them. A moment of mutual recognition and respect that excluded everyone else in the room. That's retired Admiral Thompson, if we're being precise, she said gently, though I prefer Mrs. Thompson these days. Civilian life suits me. She paused, studying Jake with sharp eyes. Staff Sergeant Martinez, isn't it? 3rd Infantry Division? Jake nodded, clearly struggling with protocol. Should he stand? Salute? In civilian clothes? At a baby shower? With a retired flag officer? I thought so, Admiral Thompson said with satisfaction. I recognize the bearing. Good unit, the 3rd ID. I worked closely with your commanding officers during the surge operations in Afghanistan. Exceptional leadership, exceptional soldiers. Carmen was looking back and forth between them like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand the rules to. Ma'am, Jake started, but Admiral Thompson waved him off. None of that formal nonsense, son. We're at a party, but then her expression grew more serious. Though I have to say, I'm disappointed by some of the conversations I've overheard today. Comments about wasted potential and limited futures. Her gaze swept the room, settling on Carmen, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. Let me share something with all of you, Admiral Thompson said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding rooms full of powerful people. Staff Sergeant Martinez represents everything this country should be proud of. He chose service when he could have chosen comfort. He chose duty when he could have chosen ease. He chose to put his life on the line for people he's never met, including everyone in this room. Carmen opened her mouth to speak, but Admiral Thompson wasn't finished. And his wife, she continued, turning to me with a warm smile, supports that choice every single day. Military spouses sacrifice just as much as their service members. They hold families together through deployments, maintain households through constant moves, and they do it all while their partners are serving something larger than themselves. I felt tears prick my eyes. No one at these family gatherings had ever acknowledged what military life was really like, had ever recognized the challenges we faced together. So when I hear someone dismiss that sacrifice as playing soldier or suggest that choosing service over profit represents some kind of failure, Admiral Thompson's voice grew steel-edged, I find myself remembering why I spent 35 years fighting to protect the freedom that allows people to make such ignorant statements. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Carmen looked like she wanted to disappear into her decorated chair. Then Admiral Thompson did something that changed everything. Admiral Thompson turned to face Jake directly, her posture straightening in a way that commanded instant attention from everyone in the room. What happened next was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. She brought her right hand up in a crisp, perfect military salute. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," she said in a voice that carried 35 years of command authority, "it has been an honor sharing this afternoon with you and your wife." The effect was instantaneous and electric. Jake shot to his feet so fast his chair nearly toppled backward. His own salute was textbook perfect, held with unwavering precision as he looked directly into the eyes of a woman who had commanded naval operations across 3 theaters of war. "Admiral Thompson, ma'am," he said, his voice strong and clear, "the honor is entirely mine." The two of them held that salute for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. In that moment, the entire dynamics of the room shifted completely. This wasn't just a military courtesy. It was a recognition between warriors, an acknowledgement of shared service and mutual respect that transcended rank, branch, and generation. Carmen's mouth had fallen open. She stared at the scene unfolding in front of her with the expression of someone watching their worldview crumble in real time. The other guests were equally stunned, but their reactions ranged from awe to embarrassment as they began to understand exactly what had been happening. Rosa Martinez stood frozen near the gift table, her hand pressed to her chest, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son receive recognition from one of the highest-ranking military officers she'd ever encountered. When Admiral Thompson finally dropped her salute, Jake remained at attention for another beat, before relaxing into a more casual stance. But the change in him was remarkable. Gone was the contained tension he'd carried all afternoon. His shoulders were back, his head high, and there was a quiet pride radiating from him that filled the entire space. "Please sit down, Sergeant," Admiral Thompson said warmly, "though I have to say your bearing does credit to your unit and your service." Jake sat, but he remained alert and engaged in a way that was completely different from his earlier withdrawal. Admiral Thompson had done more than acknowledge his service. She'd validated his worth in front of people who had spent the afternoon questioning his choices. Carmen finally found her voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. I didn't know. Mrs. Thompson, I had no idea you were." "A retired flag officer?" Admiral Thompson's smile was diplomatic but cool. "No reason you should have, dear. I don't make a habit of announcing my former rank at social gatherings. Though I do find it interesting how people talk about military service when they think there are no consequences to their words." The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen looked around the room desperately, as if searching for support, but found only uncomfortable faces and averted eyes. Her friends from the yoga studio and book club were studying their phones. Her neighbors were suddenly fascinated by the floral arrangements. "Admiral," Jake said carefully, "with your permission, I'd like to ask about your service. It's not often we get to meet someone of your rank and experience." Quote. Admiral Thompson's entire demeanor brightened. "Of course. Though I warn you, once you get old military folks talking about their service, we tend to go on a bit." "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan," Jake said. 3rd Infantry, like you mentioned. We worked with naval aviation units on several operations. Close air support, medical evacuations. Some of the finest people I've ever served with. The integration between services has come so far since my early days," Admiral Thompson replied, settling into her chair with obvious enthusiasm. "When I was a junior officer, inter-service cooperation was more theoretical than practical. By the time I made the flag rank, we were truly operating as joint forces." Watching them talk was like witnessing a conversation in a foreign language that only they spoke fluently. They discussed operations, command structures, the challenges of leading in combat zones. Their shared understanding was complete and immediate, built on experiences that civilians could never fully comprehend. Carmen tried several times to interject, to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but she was completely out of her depth. When she made a comment about how complicated military life seemed, Admiral Thompson fixed her with a look that could have frozen fire. "Complicated, yes," the Admiral said, "but so is anything worth doing. Building character is complicated. Serving something larger than yourself is complicated. Raising children who understand duty and honor, that's complicated too." The pointed reference to raising children made Carmen's hand move protectively to her belly. She was finally beginning to understand that her afternoon of superiority and judgment had been witnessed by someone whose opinion actually mattered in the military world. "Admiral Thompson," Rosa Martinez finally spoke up, her voice thick with emotion, "I want to thank you for your service and for standing up for my son." Admiral Thompson rose and walked over to Rosa, taking the older woman's hands in both of hers. "Mrs. Martinez, you raised a son who chose to serve his country with honor. That reflects on you as much as it does on him. You should be incredibly proud." Rosa broke down completely then, sobbing as Admiral Thompson embraced her. 30 years of worry about Jake's deployment, years of defending his choices to relatives who didn't understand, years of watching him struggle with readjustment and family tensions. It all came pouring out. "I was so scared," Rosa whispered. "When he deployed, when he came back different, when family members said he should have made different choices, I didn't know how to defend him." "You defended him by loving him," Admiral Thompson said firmly, "by supporting his choice to serve. That's what military families do. They hold the home front together while their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines hold the line overseas." Jake stood and walked over to his mother, wrapping both women in a gentle hug. For the first time all afternoon, his family looked unified and strong. Carmen sat alone in her decorated chair, surrounded by expensive gifts but isolated by her earlier behavior. The contrast was stark. On one side of the room, a military family supported by someone who understood their sacrifice, and on the other, a woman who had spent the day diminishing that sacrifice and was now facing the consequences. "Carmen," Admiral Thompson said, finally addressing her directly, "I hope you'll think about what we've discussed today. Military families face enough challenges without additional judgment from the people who should be supporting them most." Carmen nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. Whether they were tears of shame, embarrassment, or genuine regret was unclear, but the arrogance and superiority she'd displayed earlier had completely evaporated. Admiral Thompson gathered her purse and prepared to leave. "Rosa, thank you for inviting me. It's been a memorable afternoon," she turned to Jake and me. "Sergeant, Mrs. Martinez, it truly has been an honor. If you're ever in the area and want to continue our conversation about joint operations, I'd welcome the company." She handed Jake a simple business card. I caught a glimpse of it. No fancy titles, just Dorothy Thompson, with a phone number and address. "And Carmen," Admiral Thompson said, pausing at the door, "congratulations on your upcoming arrival. I hope your daughter grows up understanding the value of service and sacrifice. The world needs more people who choose duty over comfort." With that, she walked out of the community center, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget what they'd witnessed. The baby shower continued for another hour, but the energy had completely changed. Conversations were quieter, more respectful. Several guests approached Jake to thank him for his service, words they should have spoken earlier but hadn't thought to offer until Admiral Thompson's presence reminded them of their importance. Carmen opened the remaining gifts mechanically, her earlier enthusiasm completely gone. When she came to a simple silver picture frame from one of Rosa's church friends, she held it with more care and appreciation than she'd shown any of the expensive presents. As we gathered our things to leave, Carmen finally approached us. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked smaller somehow, deflated. "Jake," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology, both of you. I said things today that were wrong and hurtful, and I'm sorry." Jake studied his sister for a long moment before nodding. "I appreciate that, Carmen, really. I didn't understand. I still don't, completely, but I want to try." That's all we can ask for, I said, meaning it. Rosa hugged us both tightly before we left. I'm so proud of you, she whispered to Jake, and now I know how to explain to people why. Driving home in our modest sedan, Jake was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. 35 years of service, he said wonderingly. Rear Admiral, can you believe that? I can believe it, I replied. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, you could tell she was someone important. Not just important, Jake corrected. She was someone who understood. Someone who got it. And that, I realized, had made all the difference. Not just Admiral Thompson's rank or her credentials, but her understanding of what military service really meant, and her willingness to stand up for it when it was being attacked. The gifts we'd brought to that baby shower hadn't changed. Our financial situation hadn't improved. Jake's rank hadn't been elevated. But everything had changed anyway, because someone who mattered had recognized the value of what we represented. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person who understands the weight of the choices you've made and who's willing to stand up and say they matter. Admiral Thompson gave us more than respect that day. She gave us validation, dignity, and the knowledge that our sacrifices hadn't gone unnoticed. It was the best gift anyone could have asked for. 3 weeks after the baby shower, I was restocking supplies in the base clinic when my phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Carmen wants to talk to you both. Can you come for dinner Sunday? Quote. I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Since the shower, there had been radio silence from Carmen's side of the family. No follow-up calls, no thank you notes, nothing. Jake and I had assumed we'd be persona non grata for the foreseeable future. What do you think? I asked Jake that evening as he cleaned his gear after point. He paused, considering. Mom says Carmen's been different since the shower, quieter. Maybe she really does want to make things right. Sunday dinner at the Martinez family home was usually a loud, chaotic affair, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, kids running around, and Rosa's telenovelas playing in the background. This time, the house felt subdued. Carmen sat at the far end of the table, her pregnancy now more pronounced, picking at her food while the rest of us made careful small talk. Diego, Carmen's husband, seemed particularly uncomfortable. He kept glancing between Carmen and Jake as if waiting for someone to explain what had happened at the shower. Clearly, Carmen hadn't given him the full story. After dinner, Carmen finally spoke up. Jake, Mia, could we talk privately, on the patio? The three of us stepped outside into the warm evening air. Carmen's hands were shaking as she settled into one of Rosa's garden chairs. I've been thinking about what happened in the shower, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. About the things I said, the way I acted. Jake remained silent, giving her space to continue. I called Mrs. Thompson, Carmen said suddenly. Admiral Thompson, I mean. I got her number from Mom and I called her. My eyebrows shot up. That was unexpected. I wanted to apologize to her directly, Carmen continued, for my behavior, for the things I said about military service in front of someone who had dedicated her life to it. What did she say? I asked, genuinely curious. Carmen's laugh was shaky. She invited me for coffee, can you believe that? After everything I said, she invited me to her house for coffee and conversation? Jake leaned forward slightly. Did you go? Yesterday morning. Carmen's hands moved to her belly, a gesture that was becoming habitual. Her house is beautiful, but not in the way I expected. It's not fancy or expensive looking. It's dignified, filled with books and photographs and memories. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. She has pictures everywhere, not just family photos, but pictures from her service. Her in uniform with other officers, receiving medals, commanding ships. There was one photo of her in dress whites standing next to the Secretary of the Navy. Another of her with a group of female officers from different branches. Pioneers, she called them. Carmen's voice grew stronger as she continued. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her career, about the challenges she faced as one of the first women to reach flag rank in the Navy. The discrimination, the doubts, the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of the uniform. Jake's expression had shifted to one of intense interest. Stories from senior officers, especially trailblazers like Admiral Thompson, were rare and valuable. She told me about decisions she had to make that affected thousands of lives, Carmen went on. Times when she had to choose between following orders she disagreed with and standing up for what she believed was right. She said command was about carrying the weight of other people's lives and futures on your shoulders every single day. I felt a chill run down my spine. These were the kinds of burdens that civilian families rarely understood about military service. But the thing that really got to me, Carmen said, tears starting to flow, was when she showed me letters. Hundreds of them, from families of sailors who served under her command. Thank you notes from parents whose children came home safely because of decisions she made. Wedding invitations from couples who met while serving in her units. Birth announcements from families who named their children after her. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She said that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or house values. It's measured in lives touched, in service rendered, in sacrifices made for something bigger than yourself. She said that every military family, from the newest recruit to the most senior officer, contributes to something that keeps our country safe and free. Jake was very still, absorbing every word. Then she asked me about you, Jake, about your service, your deployments, what you've been through. I realized I don't know anything about what you actually did over there. I never asked because I thought it wasn't important, that it was just playing soldier, like I said. The phrase hung in the air between us, carrying all the weight of the hurt it had caused. So I'm asking now, Carmen continued, looking directly at her brother. What did you do? What was it really like? Jake was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with how much to share. Military personnel often kept the hardest parts of their service private, especially from family members who wouldn't understand. I was in charge of convoy security, he said finally. My job was to get supplies, personnel, and equipment from point A to point B safely. That meant dealing with IEDs, ambushes, hostile territory where every mile could be your last. Carmen's face went pale. I lost soldiers, Carmen. Good people who trusted me to bring them home. I made decisions that saved lives and decisions that didn't. I carry that with me every day. His voice was steady, but I could see the cost of these admissions in his eyes. The wooden toy chest you didn't like at the shower? I bought that from a local craftsman in Kabul whose workshop was destroyed in a bombing. I helped him rebuild it, and when I came home he sent me that chest as a thank you gift. It represents friendship across cultural lines, hope in the middle of destruction, and the idea that beauty can survive in the worst places. Carmen was crying openly now. The quilt Mia brought was made by wives from our unit. Each square represents a soldier who deployed with me. They made it during my second tour, when Mia was dealing with everything at home alone. The broken water heater, the car trouble, the loneliness, the constant fear that every knock on the door might be casualty notification officers. I felt tears start in my own eyes. Jake rarely talked about the home front sacrifices I'd made. Admiral Thompson helped me understand something, Carmen said through her tears. She said that military families don't just serve their country during deployments, they serve every day. Through the separations, the moves, the uncertainty, the constant awareness that freedom isn't free. She looked at both of us with something I'd never seen in her eyes before, genuine respect. I want to understand, she said simply. I want my daughter to grow up knowing her Uncle Jake is a hero, not understanding why her mother was too ignorant to see it. Jake reached over and took his sister's hand. You're not ignorant, Carmen. You just lived in a different world. Most people do. That's okay. It's actually what we were fighting to protect. Admiral Thompson said something else, Carmen continued. She said that the military is like a family spread across the world, and that attacking one member's service is like attacking the service of everyone who's ever worn the uniform. She said when I diminished your choices, I was diminishing every person who's ever chosen duty over comfort. She paused, gathering herself. She also said that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to become better. She said the military teaches people that failure isn't falling short. It's failing to learn from your mistakes and do better next time. Jake squeezed her hand gently. That sounds like something a good leader would say. She wants to meet you properly, Carmen said suddenly, away from baby showers and family drama. She said she'd like to hear your stories, learn about current operations from someone who's been there recently. Jake's eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since his discharge. Contact with senior military leadership, especially someone of Admiral Thompson's caliber, was both an honor and an opportunity. She's also... Carmen hesitated, then plunged ahead. She's offered to be a reference for you. If you ever want to pursue civilian leadership positions, government work, anything where your military experience would be valued. She said a recommendation from her carries weight in certain circles. I gasped. Letters of recommendation from flag officers were incredibly valuable, potentially life-changing for career prospects. Why would she do that? Jake asked, clearly stunned. Because she believes in recognizing and supporting good soldiers, Carmen replied, and because she thinks civilian America needs more people who understand duty, honor, and sacrifice in leadership positions. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset over Rose's garden. The tension that had defined family gatherings for years seemed to be dissolving in the warm evening air. There's something else, Carmen said eventually. Admiral Thompson is organizing a veterans networking event next month. Business leaders, government officials, military retirees, all focused on helping current and former service members transition to civilian careers. She specifically asked if you'd be interested in attending. Jake looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. These kinds of connections could open doors we'd never even known existed. I'd be honored, Jake said simply. Carmen smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. Good, because I already told her you'd be there. And Mia, she wants to meet with you too. She said military spouses often have skills and experiences that are undervalued in the civilian job market. As we prepared to go back inside, Carmen stopped us one more time. Jake, Mia, I know I can't take back the things I said or undo the hurt I caused, but I want you to know that I'm going to be different going forward. Better. My daughter is going to grow up understanding what real service looks like. She looked directly at her brother, and she's going to be proud to have an uncle who chose to serve his country with honor. Walking back into the house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years of family gatherings. Hope. Not just for improved relationships, but for the possibility that Jake's military service might finally be seen as the asset it truly was, rather than the limitation others had made it out to be. Admiral Thompson had done more than defend us at a baby shower. She'd opened a door to a different future, one where Jake's service was valued and our sacrifices were understood. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to help families see what they've been missing. Sometimes it takes someone with unquestionable authority to change minds that seemed unchangeable. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that person becomes an advocate who helps transform not just understanding, but opportunities as well. The Veterans Networking event was held at the Beverly Hills Hotel, the same venue Carmen had mentioned when criticizing our choice of community center for the baby shower. The irony wasn't lost on me as Jake adjusted his dress blues one final time in the hotel parking lot. Are you ready for this? I asked, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from his jacket. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, but I could hear the nervous excitement in his voice. Still can't believe Admiral Thompson arranged all this. The ballroom was impressive. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hotel's famous gardens. But what struck me most was the diversity of the crowd. Young veterans in sharp business suits mingled with senior military retirees still wearing their ribbons and pins. Corporate executives chatted with government officials. The energy in the room was electric with possibility. Admiral Thompson spotted us immediately and glided over with the kind of confident bearing that parted crowds naturally. Sergeant Martinez, Mrs. Martinez, she said warmly, I'm so glad you could make it. Come, there are several people I'd like you to meet. The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions. A defense contractor looking for project managers with combat experience. A tech startup CEO who specifically recruited veterans for their problem-solving skills. A state assemblyman who'd served in the Marines and was building a network of veteran staffers. Each conversation revealed opportunities I'd never imagined existed. Jake's convoy security experience translated to logistics management. His leadership under pressure appealed to crisis management firms. His ability to work with diverse teams in high-stress environments caught the attention of several consulting companies. The key, Admiral Thompson explained as she guided us through the crowd, is helping civilians understand that military skills are transferable skills. Most hiring managers don't realize that a staff sergeant who managed convoy operations in Afghanistan can absolutely handle supply chain management for a Fortune 500 company. We were introduced to Maria Santos, a former Army captain who now ran veteran placement services for a major headhunting firm. What branch and specialty? Maria asked Jake immediately. Army, Transportation and Logistics, Jake replied. Maria's eyes lit up. Perfect timing. I have 3 clients specifically requesting candidates with your background. One's a global shipping company, another's an emergency response coordination firm, and the third is a government contractor working on disaster relief logistics. She handed Jake her business card and scheduled a meeting for the following week. The starting salaries range from $65,000 to $90,000, depending on the position and your willingness to travel, Maria continued. All of them value military experience and offer excellent advancement opportunities. I felt Jake's hand tighten around mine. Those salary figures were nearly double what he made as a staff sergeant. There's more, Admiral Thompson said, appearing at my elbow. Mia, I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Chen. She runs a program helping military spouses transition into healthcare administration. Dr. Chen was a petite woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Admiral Thompson tells me you work at a base clinic. What's your background? I have a degree in Health Services Administration, I explained. I've been doing administrative work at the clinic, but mostly basic scheduling and records management. Underutilized, Dr. Chen said immediately. Military spouses often have advanced degrees but end up in positions below their qualification level because of frequent moves and deployment schedules. We're working to change that. She explained a program that helped military spouses leverage their experience managing military healthcare systems for positions in civilian hospitals, insurance companies, and healthcare tech firms. The VA hospital system alone is crying out for people who understand both military culture and healthcare administration, she continued. Starting positions range from $50,000 to $70,000 with rapid advancement potential for the right candidates. I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. For years, I'd felt like my career was on hold, that military life meant sacrificing my professional ambitions. The possibility of meaningful work that valued, rather than merely accommodated my military connection, was overwhelming. Admiral Thompson had moved on to introduce Jake to a group of defense contractors, but I could see him from across the room, animated in conversation with people who understood the value of his experience. This is incredible, I told Dr. Chen. I had no idea these opportunities existed. Most military families don't, she replied sadly. The civilian job market doesn't know how to recruit from military communities effectively, and military families don't know how to translate their experience for civilian employers. That's what events like this are trying to change. As the evening progressed, both Jake and I collected business cards, scheduled follow-up meetings, and learned about opportunities that could transform our financial situation and career prospects. The most surprising introduction came near the end of the night. Admiral Thompson brought over a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing an expensive suit and an unmistakable air of authority. I'd like you to meet Senator Robert Mitchell, Admiral Thompson said. Senator, this is Staff Sergeant Jake Martinez and his wife Mia. Senator Mitchell shook our hands warmly. Admiral Thompson has been telling me about your family's story. I understand there was quite a situation at a baby shower recently. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Senator Mitchell's expression was sympathetic rather than judgmental. Unfortunately, what happened to you is more common than it should be, he continued. Military families face misunderstanding and sometimes outright hostility from civilians who don't appreciate the sacrifices you make. He handed Jake a card with the Senate seal embossed on it. I'm working on legislation to improve veteran transition services and military family support programs. I could use advisors who understand these issues from personal experience. Would you be interested in consulting on some policy development? Jake's eyes widened. You want me to advise on legislation? Your experience matters, Sergeant. The voices of current and recently transitioned service members are exactly what we need to ensure these programs actually work for the people they're meant to serve. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Senator Mitchell asked detailed questions about Jake's transition challenges, the obstacles military families faced in civilian job markets, and the gaps in current support services. The problem, Senator Mitchell explained, is that most policy gets written by people who've never served. They mean well, but they don't understand the real challenges. We need input from people like you to make sure we're solving actual problems, not just theoretical ones. By the time we left the hotel that night, our heads were spinning with possibilities. Jake had 3 job interviews scheduled, I had 2, and we'd both been invited to participate in a policy advisory group that could influence legislation affecting thousands of military families. "Did that really just happen?" Jake asked as we drove home through the Los Angeles traffic. "I think it did," I replied, still processing everything. "Admiral Thompson didn't just defend us at that baby shower. She opened doors I didn't even know existed." "The crazy part," Jake said thoughtfully, "is that none of this would have happened if Carmen hadn't acted the way she did at the shower. If she'd been polite and supportive, Admiral Thompson would never have revealed who she was." He was right. Carmen's behavior, as hurtful as it had been in the moment, had created the circumstances that led to Admiral Thompson's intervention and everything that followed. "Maybe that's how life works sometimes," I mused. "The worst moments create opportunities for the best changes." 3 days later, I was reviewing materials for my first interview when my phone rang. It was Carmen. "Mia," she said, her voice excited, "I have news. Diego and I have been talking, and we want to do something to support veteran families in our community." "What do you mean?" I asked. "We're starting a foundation," Carmen said, using some of the money from Diego's real estate business to fund career transition services for veterans and military spouses. Admiral Thompson is helping us set it up. I nearly dropped the phone. "Carmen, that's incredible." "We want to call it the Martinez Family Foundation for Military Families," she continued. "If that's okay with you and Jake, we want your names on it, because this whole thing started with realizing how wrong I was about military service and how much support families like yours actually need." The conversation that followed was emotional and hopeful. Carmen and Diego had been meeting with Admiral Thompson weekly, learning about the challenges military families faced and the gaps in existing support services. "We can't undo the years of not understanding," Carmen said, "but we can use our resources to help other families avoid the struggles you've been through." Admiral Thompson says there are hundreds of military families in LA County alone who could benefit from career transition support, networking opportunities, and advocacy. When I hung up the phone, I sat in stunned silence. The baby shower incident that had started as one of the most humiliating experiences of my life had somehow transformed into career opportunities, policy influence, and now a family foundation dedicated to helping other military families. Admiral Thompson had done more than salute Jake that day. She'd set in motion a chain of events that was changing not just our lives, but potentially the lives of countless other military families. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters create the most extraordinary outcomes. Sometimes standing up for what's right in a single moment can ripple outward in ways you never imagined. And sometimes the people who hurt you the most become the ones who help you the most, once they truly understand what they are missing. 6 months later, I stood in the maternity ward of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, holding my newborn niece for the first time. Little Isabella Carmen Martinez Rodriguez had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin, and she was absolutely perfect. Carmen looked exhausted, but radiant in her hospital bed, watching as Jake gently adjusted the baby's blanket with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to handle delicate things in dangerous places. "She's beautiful, sis," Jake said softly, his voice filled with the wonder that new babies bring to even the toughest soldiers. "She is," Carmen agreed, then looked at both of us with an expression I was still getting used to, genuine warmth mixed with deep respect. "I keep thinking about what kind of world I want her to grow up in. What kind of values do I want her to have?" The past 6 months had brought changes none of us could have predicted. Jake had accepted a position with Henderson Global Logistics, a company that managed supply chains for humanitarian organizations worldwide. His starting salary was $82,000, more money than we'd ever imagined making. More importantly, the work was meaningful. He was using his military experience to get food, medicine, and supplies to disaster zones and refugee camps around the world. My own career transformation had been equally dramatic. Dr. Chen's program had placed me in a position with Kaiser Permanente's Veteran Healthcare Division, where I was helping design programs to better serve military families transitioning to civilian healthcare systems. The work combined my healthcare administration background with my personal understanding of military culture in ways that felt deeply purposeful. But the most unexpected development had been my growing friendship with Admiral Thompson. What started as professional mentorship had evolved into something more personal. She'd become a grandmother figure to both Jake and me, someone who understood our journey in ways our own families were only beginning to grasp. Admiral Thompson called this morning, Carmen said, interrupting my thoughts. She wanted to check on Isabella and give you both an update on the foundation. The Martinez Family Foundation for Military Families had officially launched 3 months earlier with an initial funding commitment of $2 million from Diego's Real Estate Ventures. Admiral Thompson served as the advisory board chair, lending her credibility and connections to the effort. What's the latest? Jake asked, still mesmerized by his niece. We've helped place 47 veterans in new positions, Carmen said proudly. 12 military spouses have found career opportunities they couldn't access before. And the policy recommendations you and Jake developed with Senator Mitchell are actually being incorporated into the new Veterans Transition Act. I shook my head in amazement. The policy work had been challenging but incredibly rewarding. Senator Mitchell had been true to his word, involving both Jake and me in substantive discussions about how to improve veteran transition services. Our recommendations, born from personal experience and refined through Admiral Thompson's strategic guidance, were now influencing federal legislation that could affect hundreds of thousands of military families. There's something else, Carmen continued, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. Admiral Thompson has a proposal for you both. Jake and I exchanged glances. Admiral Thompson's proposals had a way of being both exciting and life-changing. She wants to offer you positions with the foundation, Carmen said. Full-time, with salaries competitive with your current jobs. Jake would run veteran placement services and Mia would head up the military spouse career development program. The baby in my arms stirred slightly, and I found myself thinking about the future Isabella would inherit. A world where her Uncle Jake's military service was valued rather than dismissed. A world where families like ours had advocates and opportunities rather than obstacles and misunderstanding. We'd be working together? I asked. Same organization, different departments, Carmen clarified. Admiral Thompson says the foundation needs people who understand these issues from the inside. People who've lived through the challenges you're trying to solve for others. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications. Leaving his new position at Henderson Global would be risky, but the foundation offered something different. The chance to systematically address the problems that had nearly derailed our own transition from military to civilian life. What do you think? He asked me. I looked down at Isabella, then at Carmen, then at my husband, who'd served his country with honor and was now being offered the chance to serve his fellow veterans with equal dedication. I think, I said slowly, that Admiral Thompson has a way of seeing possibilities that the rest of us miss. Carmen laughed. That's exactly what she said you'd say. A knock on the door interrupted our conversation. Rosa Martinez entered carrying a massive bouquet of flowers and wearing the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face. How's our little princess? She cooed, immediately reaching for Isabella. Perfect, Jake said, carefully transferring his niece to his mother's arms. Just like her grandmother predicted. Rosa had been transformed by the events of the past 6 months almost as much as the rest of us. Watching her son receive recognition for his service, seeing him build a meaningful civilian career, and witnessing the family come together around supporting other military families, had given her a confidence and pride that radiated from her. Admiral Thompson sends her love, Rosa said, settling into the chair beside Carmen's bed. She wanted to come herself, but she's in Washington meeting with Defense Department officials about expanding the Foundation's partnerships. Even in her 70s, Admiral Thompson maintained a schedule that would exhaust people half her age. Her commitment to improving life for military families had only intensified since our first meeting at the baby shower. She also wanted me to give you this, Rosa continued, pulling an envelope from her purse and handing it to Jake. Jake opened it carefully and pulled out a formal-looking document with official seals and signatures. His expression shifted from curiosity to shock as he read. "What is it?" I asked. It's a citation," Jake said, his voice filled with disbelief, "from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, for exceptional contribution to veteran transition services and policy development." Carmen gasped. "Jake, that's incredible." He continued reading. "It says my work on the Veterans Transition Act represents the kind of informed advocacy that strengthens our nation's commitment to those who have served. It's signed by the Secretary and Admiral Thompson recommended it to me for it." I felt tears start in my eyes. After years of feeling like Jake's military service was undervalued, watching him receive recognition at the highest levels of government was overwhelming. "There's more," Rosa said with a knowing smile. "Admiral Thompson says this opens doors to even bigger opportunities. Congressional testimony, national veteran advocacy positions, maybe even political office if that's something you'd be interested in." Jake stared at the citation, and I could see him imagining futures he'd never dared to consider. "You know what the strangest part is?" Carmen said softly, watching her brother process this latest development. "If I hadn't been such a terrible person at my baby shower, none of this would have happened." "You weren't terrible," Jake said firmly. "You were uninformed. There's a difference." "I was terrible," Carmen insisted. "But maybe terrible moments can lead to beautiful changes if you're willing to learn from them." Isabella chose that moment to wake up and demand attention, filling the room with the healthy cries of a newborn who expected the world to respond to her needs. Rosa bounced her gently, murmuring soothing words in Spanish, while the baby's protests gradually subsided. "She's going to grow up in a different world than we did," I said, watching the 3 generations of Martinez women together. "A world where military service is respected, where families like ours have support systems, where people like Admiral Thompson make sure no one falls through the cracks. A world where her uncle is a recognized advocate for veteran families," Carmen added, "and her aunt is helping design the programs that will support the next generation of military families." Jake stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. The same city where he'd grown up feeling like his choice to serve was somehow inadequate now offered opportunities he'd never imagined possible. "Remember what Admiral Thompson said at the networking event?" he asked, turning back to face us. "That the military teaches you that failure isn't falling short. It's failing to learn from your mistakes and do better next time." "I remember," Carmen said quietly. "I think that applies to families too," Jake continued. "We fell short for a while. We misunderstood each other. We let outside pressures create divisions between us. But we learned. We did better. And now we're stronger than we were before." He walked back to his sister's bedside and took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being willing to learn, for changing, for turning your mistakes into something that helps other people." Carmen squeezed his hand tightly. "Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me the chance to do better." As visiting hours came to an end, we gathered our things and prepared to leave. Isabella was sleeping peacefully in Carmen's arms, completely unaware that she'd been born into a family transformed by grace, understanding, and the unexpected intervention of a retired Navy admiral who refused to let military service go unrecognized. Walking to the parking garage, Jake pulled out his phone and called Admiral Thompson. "Admiral," he said when she answered, "it's Jake Martinez. I wanted to thank you for the citation and to let you know that Mia and I have made our decision about the foundation positions." I could hear her voice through the phone, warm and encouraging. "We'd be honored to accept," Jake continued. "When do we start?" The conversation that followed was filled with plans, timelines, and the kind of strategic thinking that had made Admiral Thompson a successful military leader and was now making her an effective advocate for veteran families. As we drove home through the familiar streets of Los Angeles, I reflected on how completely our lives had changed since that afternoon at the community center. A baby shower that started as a family obligation had become the catalyst for career transformations, policy influence, and a foundation that was already helping dozens of military families build better futures. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Admiral Thompson hadn't been at that shower? I asked Jake. He was quiet for a moment, considering. I think she would have found another way to help us, he said finally. People like Admiral Thompson don't wait for perfect moments to do the right thing. They create the moments they need. He reached over and took my hand. Besides, he continued, I'm starting to think that everything happens for a reason. The hard deployments, the difficult transitions, even Carmen's behavior at the shower. It all led us to where we are now, to work that matters, to a family that understands each other, to the chance to help other people avoid the struggles we went through. As we pulled into our driveway, I thought about Isabella sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, completely unaware that her very existence had brought healing to a family and purpose to an organization dedicated to serving those who serve. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest moments. Sometimes standing up for what's right in the face of misunderstanding can create ripples that transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, a single salute can change everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.